7, 6, 11, 5.
Once you walk onto that mainland, there's no rescues.
Moving up and down again.
28 Days Later is widely credited with vivifying zombie movies in the early 2000s. Director Danny Boyle and screenwriter Alex Garland shook the subgenre out of rigor mortis and pushed it into a full-blown sprint. And the dead have been running and walking and walking and walking over on AMC on screen ever since. But as great horror usually does, 28 Days Later spoke to a moment, specifically the terror attacks of September 11th and the resulting geopolitical fallout, and hauntingly captured how easily rage and fear can trap people in cycles of violence in the wake of a disaster. Following more recent upheavals like Brexit and the COVID-19 pandemic, the new sequel 28 Years Later feels like a bookend to that idea, turning its focus to what it takes to break the cycle. Boyle and Garland dive back into the infected hellscape that they created head first, and the decades of perspective they bring back to post-apocalyptic Britain leave 28 Years Later's musings on what matters most feeling right on time. Boyle sidesteps the wider spread of the rage virus suggested by the end of 2007's 28 Weeks Later by quickly establishing that the infection has been pushed back and contained to the UK mainland. Enough time has passed that an entire generation has sprung up without any first-hand experience of how the world fell apart after the outbreak. 28 Years Later wisely centers its action on 14-year-old Spike, a citizen of the heavily fortified Holy Island who's taking his first steps into the wilderness as a hunter in training with his dad, Jamie. Young enough to want to bring a toy on the hunt, but old enough to know that that's kid stuff, Spike's vulnerability and bravery are at constant odds as he witnesses the terrors of the rage virus firsthand. Alfie Williams, in his feature debut, effortlessly shoulders the swings between those two poles, helping to ground 28 Years Later in an emotional realism that evokes what Cillian Murphy achieved in 28 Days Later. Yes, Spike makes mistakes and hesitates in combat, but rarely, if ever, do these feel like the actions of a helpless child in such a cruel world. Instead, Boyle constantly drives home the idea that Spike and his peers have been forced to grow up way too quickly. The way Holy Island's citizens are lionizing Spike's ascension to the hunter role, good-natured though it is, has a haunting violence begets violence quality to it, underlined by the montages of child soldiers and the war poetry of Rudyard Kipling peppered into the edit. Holy Island makes for an effective, if not all that subtle, microcosm of isolationism, and the threats that seem to get under the citizens' skin most, like Rafe Fiennes' Kelson, who we'll get to in a moment, will feel deeply familiar to anyone who hasn't been living under a rock for the last 5 years. Aaron Taylor Johnson's Jamie, who would have been about Spike's age at the time of the initial outbreak, presents a thornier, amplified take of how manhood has evolved in decades-long quarantine. He's incredibly patient and supportive, tender even towards Spike in their one-on-one time, but Jamie exaggerates Spike's prowess with boorish bravado, and it's enough to make the boy more insecure about his survival fundamentals. Taylor Johnson embodies those conflicting sides of fatherhood without either becoming too one-note. Jamie's detached treatment of Spike's ailing mom Isla, played by Jodie Comer, further drives a wedge between father and son, especially once Spike realizes that there's more that both of them could have been doing to help her. Isla experiences near constant bouts of disorientation and pain, putting Spike into a position of caretaking that further accelerates his coming of age. Isla's scattered mind makes her a slightly less focused character in her own right, but love for Spike shines through her pain, and the lessons she has for him end up feeling even more valuable than Dad's tips for taking out infected in one shot. And I just want to stop down real quick here just to call attention to the fact that Aaron Taylor Johnson is playing like hot hunter boy running through the woods, training his son in the way that Russell Crowe was training him in Kraven the Hunter. It's a weird sort of amalgamation of those two characters ported into this movie, which is leagues, miles, 28 years better than Kraven the Hunter. Anyway, back to the review. 28 Years Later's greatest challenge is one of Boyle and Garland's own making. The explosion of zombie fiction inspired by 28 Days Later means a lot of points of comparison for both the action and the drama. The infected action is slick and well staged, but it's here that the hordes of imitators have most watered down Boyle's brand of zombie violence. 28 Years Later introduces some new subspecies of infected that feel like they could have shambled right out of Left 4 Dead, with some posing questions about the nature of the infection that are begging to be answered by the already shot sequel 28 years later, The Bone Temple. Most effective are the Alpha Infected, a truly hilarious name for the brutes given the themes that Garland's script traffics in. These crazy ripped, nigh invincible hulks immediately ratchet up the tension anytime they're on screen, with finishers that would make even Sub-Zero exclaim,
"Flawless victory."
A chase scene involving an Alpha making its way towards Holy Island results in one of the most unbearably tense moments of the film, like if the oncoming train in that scene from Stand By Me were a naked bodybuilder running full tilt at the leads. A hog-wild moment, to be sure. But as great as the makeup and digital effects in 28 years later are, it's just not as exciting to see a person kill a zombie or vice versa as it was in 2002. Boyle and Garland seem content to let their imitators and acolytes try to outdo each other. 23 years later, they are more concerned with matters of the heart. Boyle chases the guerrilla filmmaking textures of 28 Days Later's groundbreaking digital cinematography by shooting 28 years later mostly on iPhone 15 Max Pros. The small size of those phones compared to big unwieldy movie cameras does allow for seriously kinetic coverage during the action scenes. As Boyle himself dubbed it, there's a poor man's bullet time effect accentuating some kill shots that looks so cool the first time, but loses just a little bit of its luster by the 4th or 5th deployment. That shifty camera move is also infrequently used to accentuate character, like in a moment where Boyle wants to underline Jamie's bubbling lowercase r rage by focusing on a knife in his hands and performing just a little shift to remind us that the virus doesn't create fury, it merely amplifies it past all reason. Boyle puts the iPhone camera to work in low-light situations as well, painting Spike's zombie nightmares in an angry, night vision-y red. It's a testament to how far technology has advanced since 28 Days Later that the shot on iPhone acknowledgement rarely feels that relevant. They highlight the beauty of the British countryside so well, though, that it never feels like an unfavorable trade from 28 Days Later's chillingly empty London. Drone shots similarly add a propulsive new view on the action, weaving in and out of groups of infected with dizzying speed. But, as is often the case in zombie fiction, here, let me just lean in and whisper real quick, maybe we're the real monsters. 28 years later teases out the significance of Kelson, a mysterious outcast drawn as a Colonel Kurtz type with a penchant for burning bodies en masse, and his relatively late entrance opens the door to some of the story's most potent material. Kelson's presence narrows the scope of the third act considerably, but without being too specific about what he's up to wandering around that there bone temple, it is absolutely the right call for Spike's final test, and Fiennes turns in a simple yet devastatingly effective performance to augment it. 28 years later finds Danny Boyle and Alex Garland mining the last 2 decades of cultural strife to build a timely coming-of-age story full of beauty and brutality in equal measure. Newcomer Alfie Williams ably shoulders the harrowing plot, flanked on either side by similarly strong performances from Aaron Taylor-Johnson and Jodie Comer. Boyle has plenty of new tricks up his sleeves for how to shoot 28 years later in a way that evokes the spirit of the original without copying it. And the same goes for the action, which feels more like an evolution of 28 Days Later's self-assured perspective on infected carnage, rather than an attempt to outdo the running, biting hordes of imitators that it inspired. And even though 28 Years Later's scope is much more narrow than 28 Days Later's, its message is just as powerful. Thank you so much for watching. For more movie reviews, check out what we thought of F1 and Ballerina. And as always, keep it right here on IGN.